Thank you for staying with us in this special broadcast. We're bringing to you the biggest of the insights and reactions to the union budget announced by the Finance Minister today. Let's say good evening and welcome to Mr. P Chidambaram, former Finance Minister of India, joining us right now. Mr. Chidambaram, good evening. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Chidambaram, Nirmala Sitharaman referred to the Indian cricket team's performance in Australia recently to make a larger point. If I had to ask you, how did Nirmala Sitharaman bat? Was it solid like Pujara, aggressive like Rishabh Pant, or in some other way?
She batted like the Indian team batted in the second innings of the first test and was wound up for 36 runs. That's the way she batted.
All right, let's begin with a couple of points that have emerged, Mr. Chidambaram. A higher borrowing and a higher fiscal deficit target that the government has set for itself. Yet you say that the poor, the farmers, the migrants, the salaried class have been betrayed. You say that the government has failed on defense, it has misled on healthcare and ignored the MSMEs. So the question that many are asking is, then where is the money going?
Well, it's the finance minister who should answer, because I don't think she has the money. She's just assuming that she has revenues. For example, she's assuming that she will get 1,75,000 crore by disinvestment. She will not get it. She is showing that on the revenue side in order to depress the number on the fiscal deficit. Similarly, she's assuming that total tax revenues will increase by 15%. She will not increase it by 15%. She has inflated that number to depress the fiscal deficit. So these runnings are simply not there. She's assuming these numbers on the revenue side so that the fiscal deficit doesn't go beyond the current year's fiscal deficit of 9.8 or so, 9.5 or so.
But the
this is
government...
a conjurer's trick, no?
Yes. But the government's claim is that look at the GST collections. The last 2 months straight, they have recorded over 1 lakh crore every month. So clearly there is some revival we are looking at.
Good for the government if the people of this country, the traders, are honestly paying tax. But just tell me, how does she expect to get a 15% increase in total tax receipts? If she's actually getting a 15% increase in total tax receipts, why is she showing only a 14.4% growth in nominal GDP? Please reconcile those two numbers. If total tax revenues are going to increase by 15%, why is your nominal GDP growing only by 14.4%? See, they have deliberately and craftily kept down the discussion by not printing the documents. We are struggling to get the documents and try to piece things together. In fact, they should have printed at least 1,000 copies to be available to the members of parliament at least, isn't it?
All right, I take that point. A digital bhai khata is what we saw the first time. But irrespective of Mr. Chidambaram, one thing we've learned in the last couple of years is the exercise of looking into the fine print has just become more and more complicated. A lot of back and forth has to happen. It takes days even for us to dig into it and bring out some of the highlights. But I asked you the question that I did about, all of these categories that you said were either ignored or betrayed or abandoned, because at the end of the day, it is also a tough task for a government in this year. Like we are coming out of a pandemic, we are hopefully coming out of a recession. Almost every sector, every class and category wants support from the government. It's really a very tough task to decide what you should do and allocate your funds when you have none.
No, it is not a tough task. It requires a head and a heart. It requires passion as well as compassion. She should have sat down and identified the sectors which are affected most by the 2-year slowdown and 1-year recession. For 36 months, who has suffered most? Not the corporates, not you, not me, not the high-earning professionals. The people who have suffered most are the bottom 20 to 30% who live on daily labor. The others who have suffered most are the working class, the migrant labor, the MSMEs which were forced to close down, the employees of the MSMEs who are semi-skilled, semi-educated, 8th standard, 10th standard, 11th standard. Those are the ones that are affected most. Those sections should have been given the highest priority, the first charge on the resources she's able to mobilize. She's talking about a mobilization of 34,83,236 crore. Let's take it as 35 lakh crore. You give me 35 lakh crore, and I will allocate it in a manner that helps the weakest, neediest, poorest, and most deserving.
In fact, I did go through your 10-point wish list that you had, presented for the budget, and it looks, Mr. Chidambaram, as if you had an insight on what the government is going to announce, because everything that you've put in there is not present in the finance minister's budget vision, except maybe a bit of it on the capital expenditure part. So all that you've mentioned about direct cash transfers, what you've mentioned about MSMEs, what you've mentioned about reducing the tax rates, including the GST, none of that is there. But isn't it possible that the approach is completely different? While your approach is to more give direct help, put money in the hands of people, their approach is to create an enabling environment that then sustains the growth itself.
What is the title of my article? The title of my article is No Expectations, No Disappointment. And how I ended the article, since I have no expectations, I'm prepared to be disappointed. I know this government. I think I know this government as well as you do. This government has no heart at all. There are times, there are good times, there are bad times. There is a way to make a budget in good times. There is a way to make a budget in bad times. Apart from the fact that much of the bad times is a creation of the BJP government, starting with demonetization, starting with a muddled GST. Much of the bad times is due to them. Be that as it may, you have to make a budget for bad times. We made a budget for bad times in 1991. We made a budget for bad times in 2008, 9, and 2009, 10. We also made budgets for good times, the golden period between 2004 and 2009. So you must know how to make a budget for bad times.
But when you made the budget, even then the critics would have said that look at the way the fiscal deficit is going, it's out of control, look at the way the subsidy bill is rising and getting rolled over every single year. So it perhaps is just a difference of approach.
Of course, the fiscal deficit went out of control, but that was a deliberate decision taken by Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. When I came back to the finance ministry, I said the fiscal deficit has gone out of control and reversed it. And in a matter of 1.5 years, we brought down the fiscal deficit sharply, and we left for an economy that was growing at 6.4%. 6.4 is not my number. The 6.4 is a number in the economic survey presented by Mr. Arun Jaitley along with his first budget. So I left an economy which was growing at 6.4%. Now this year, you are starting with an economy which has declined to 4%. And then there was a recession in 2020-21, which perhaps will end up with minus 10%. So you'll end up with an economy which is declining at minus 10%. You must know how to make a budget for an economy that is registering minus 10%. That is the smartness of the finance minister and the prime minister.
Okay, I take your point. There are two specific aspects that I wanted to ask you about. One is what you mentioned in the news briefing about the agri-cess, especially on the fuel tax and of course even on the customs. Now, you say it's a cruel blow to the citizens and the farmers and federalism. I understand the federalism part of it, Mr. Chidambaram, but the government's explanation is that effective burden on the consumer is not going to change. So,
How may I ask? Who's going to absorb the cess? Are the oil marketing companies absorbing the cess? In which even she should have said it. Please remember, the finance minister's speech did not mention the cess at all. It was in the annexure. MPs did not know about the cess. When I was listening on television, I did not know about the cess.
Yes.
It's only when one of the channels put out that there is a cess of 2.5 rupees and 4 rupees on petrol and diesel, I said, where is it in the speech? Now you tell me which paragraph of the speech mentions the cess?
No. So yes, I agree with you. We also missed it at that point of time. But
Why?
we've managed to pull out.
It was deliberately, just a moment, it was deliberately kept back by the finance minister, tucked away in the annexure, so that the MPs will not hear that statement. If only she had made that statement on the floor of the Lok Sabha, there would have been an uproar.
I understand that the point you're making, and again, when it comes to federalism or the laws to the state governments. But if I may just ask you what to make of this paragraph, which is there in the budget document. Consequent to the imposition of agriculture, infrastructure and development cess on petrol and diesel, the basic excise duty and the special additional excise duty rates have been reduced on them so that the overall consumer does not bear any additional burden. So the government is saying they're going to reduce the basic excise duty on both of these.
Where is it stated in the annexure? Where is it stated in the annexure that the basic excise duties are being reduced to compensate the cess? And why would you reduce the basic excise duty and impose a cess unless it is to deprive the states
to deprive the states? Yes, while the center doesn't see a harm. Because the cess goes to the central government, the states don't get a money. It's page 58, sir, of the budget speech 2021 document.
No. Page 58, what you are saying is the statement that where is the statement that they will reduce?
Yes, this is exactly the statement that I've read out to you on page 58.
Paragraph
it's
5
paragraph
on page
5.
58.
Yes.
Consequently, unbranded petrol and diesel will attract basic excise duty of 1.4 and 1.8 per litre. The SAED on unbranded petrol and diesel shall be 11 and 8 per litre respectively. Similar changes have been made. What is unbranded petrol? What about petrol and diesel sold in the gas stations? Are they branded or unbranded? I don't know. I mean, if say these companies all have got a brand, all have got a big name there, no?
Right.
It is HPCL, it is IOC, it is SR, it is Reliance.
Right.
Are they unbranded or branded? I don't know.
Right. I'm just going by the government's version that it will not impact the consumer. This is exactly the same thing they've said again for the customer, for the customs duty, where again a cess has been put on gold and alcoholic beverages. Yes.
Let us see what the retail price is tomorrow.
Okay.
If the retail price remains the same, then my criticism on the basis of federalism is absolutely correct.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you.
Just listen to me. Please don't interrupt. Please don't interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. If the price remains the same, my criticism on federalism stands. If the price rises, my criticism on both federalism and cruel to the average consumer both stand.
I take your point on federalism. Absolutely, yes, Mr. Chidambaram. Rest, of course, we may find out. There is still lack of clarity on it. Why
didn't she spell it out in her speech? Why didn't she spell this out in her speech? Why tuck it away in the annexure? Unless the idea is non-transparency.
Fair enough. A point that the government will have to answer us on. The other aspect I wanted to ask you was there was a lot of conversation about creation of a bad bank, keeping in mind the state of our banking industry, the number of bad loans, a lot of it which we don't even know about right now because NPAs are not being declared right now in this period. The government has announced a creation of an entity for asset reconstruction. Now, is this in any way going to be different from what we already have? How do we know if this can be, what is the good way of making it successful?
I have no idea. I have no idea. All I can say is this budget speech is the most non-transparent speech I've read. If you wanted to create a bad bank, you should have said so. If your asset reconstruction company is a new name for a bad bank, you should have said so. I think a bad bank is a bad idea. A number of people have said a bad bank is past its sell-by date. But if you wanted to create a bad bank, you should say so. If you're talking about conventional asset reconstruction company, there are enough asset reconstruction companies in this country.
Correct.
So what are you driving at? What are you saying? I don't know. That is because of the non-transparency in the manner in which you spell out your policies.
Correct. All right. My last question to what you referred to earlier as well is, again, no mention of the defense budget allocation. Now, while Mr. Chidambaram, I think everybody agrees in this country that modernization of our military is the need of the hour. But when the conversation is also about creating livelihoods, how do you maintain the balance?
That is the smartness of the finance minister and the political wisdom of the prime minister. How do you balance is a question you should put to us if we are making the budget. How do you balance is a question you should put to them when they are making the budget. If you don't know how to balance competing claims, then why do you make a budget? Are we agreed that defense is under threat? Are we agreed that the Chinese are occupying Indian territory? They're building villages, roads, bazaars. Are we agreed that they have not withdrawn a single inch? And after 11 rounds of talks, far from reducing their presence, they are beefing up their presence in infrastructure. They have brought radars, they have brought aircraft, they have brought heavy equipment. They are reinforcing themselves. Now, in such a situation, you present a budget without even mentioning the word defense. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm working on purely digital platforms. Tell me where in her speech does she mention defense?
No, she doesn't.
I have not come across a budget speech where the word defense is not mentioned. And then you go to the numbers. If you go to the numbers, it's extremely curious. You look at defense, go to page 10 of the budget at a glance. What does page 10 tell you, budget at a glance? Defense, revised estimate for the current year, 3,43,822 crore. Budget estimate for next year, 3,47,088 crore. That is an increase of about less than 4,000 crore.
Correct.
Have you ever come across a defense budget expenditure allocation which is only a 4,000 crore increase on the previous year? I have not done anything like that.
Yes, I agree with you. A deeper look into not just the defense budget allocation and if you're missing anything there, but even on the railway side, where she gave an overall allocation announcement of 1.1 lakh crore rupees and a capex of 1.07, if I'm mistaken. Right now, we're still trying to add the math even on that front. So there is much to be said about filling in the gaps, Mr. Chidambaram. My last question to you, before I wrap this up, the problems of some of these ailing sector remains. But the government says that the projections from most of the rating agencies is that this year we are going to see a contraction of 7 to 8% and then a growth of 11% next year. So what's to worry? We're looking at a V-shaped recovery. Do you doubt these projections that are being made currently?
The consensus was that the fiscal deficit for the current year will be 7%. The actuality is 9.5%. Has the government ever hinted anything more than 7%? Did the economic survey projected the fiscal deficit at 7.2% or so?
Yes.
The number turns out to be 9.5%. So why should I believe this government when it says all is hunky-dory? The year will end with a negative growth of 10%. And then once it's down 10%, even if you bounce back 10%, you're back to where you started 2 years ago. So you're not adding to the wealth of this country.
Yes.
Wealth of this country has been destroyed in the last 36 months. 8 quarters of slowdown and 4 quarters of a recession. And if you build back slowly. How does she say that we'll be flourishing in the fastest growing economy in a year or two? When Geeta Gopinath of IMF says we will get back to pre-COVID levels only by the year 2025. And 2025 is 5 years from today. So I don't believe the government's numbers. Not many believe the government's numbers. If you should be transparent about it, you should be upfront about it. In fact, the convenience of going digital means more and more people are kept in the dark. They should have printed at least 1,000 copies so that MPs have access to the printed documents.
Well, I'm sure, Mr. Chidambaram, once we've had more time, I have had more time to find more details and ask you more questions. You would have had more time as well to go through the details. I'm also currently looking at the app that the government has announced with all the budget documents, because that's the way, we need to apparently go now. We have an app with all the documents there. So once that happens, maybe we can connect again. Thank you so much for giving us your time today and speaking with us.